What goes on inside a person's mind right before they take their own lives? For the average person, we can make the case of economic hardships, but what about celebrities who commit suicide? In the early hours of Wednesday, 23rd February 2022, famous South African rapper Ricardo Machado, popularly known as Riky Rick, joined the long list of irresponsible celebrities to have committed suicide. Oh yes, no matter how you spin the narrative, celebrities who take their own lives are plainly irresponsible and selfish, because we as a society cannot give you this much power and status only for you to add up to our pre-existing problems. Whichever way, on the other side, Riky Rick's death sets the tone for serious discussions to be held over the mental health of this generation of South African men. Do strap in and let me tell you why. Riky Rick grew up in KwaMashu, a coastal city in Durban. He had a successful music career, which took off in 2014 following the release of his hit single, Nafutwa. He stepped things up the year after with his debut album, titled Family Values, which featured the hit song, Bosonk. When he was not singing, he was either nurturing new talents through his Cotton Fest initiative or discussing a wide range of issues on his Lab Live podcast. Despite his cheerful and scintillating outlook as a star, Rick was known to be battling depression as well as alcohol and drug addictions for years. Rick finally gave up on this fight by hanging himself to a rope inside his home in Johannesburg within the early hours of that Wednesday morning. He was aged just 34, and he left behind 2 children and a wife. For all who did not know Riky Rick before, his death was a tragedy, but for those who knew him well enough, this had been coming for a while now. You see, Riky Rick has been suicidal for literally his entire adult life, and even after he became a star, he continued to drop hints of an imminent suicide. Whether it was through his music lyrics, public interviews, or even his podcasts, he always left cryptic messages that talked about ending his life. In August 2021, just 6 months before his demise, Riky Rick granted an interview to YouTuber King Omar where he seemed to have bid his fans farewell. He said, "I will catch you on the other side. It is your boy, Riky Rick. If you never hear from me again, I love you, God bless you, and good night."
We'll catch you guys on the other side. Love you, God bless you, good night.
Even on his socials, Riky Rick hinted at suicide multiple times. And so within the early hours of 23rd February 2022, around 3:20 a.m. when he tweeted, "I'll return a stronger man. This land is still my home." Quite a number of days felt Rick was truly gone this time, long before his family even issued a Communique reporting his death. The circumstances surrounding Riky Rick's demise all point to the fact that he had this planned for a while. In fact, right before he hanged himself, he issued letters of apology to his wife, Bianca, and his 2 children. He told them it was no fault of theirs and that they should stick together. Like, for real? Yep. Now this leads me to my question. Clearly, something was amiss with Rick's mental health for a long time, so why did he not seek professional help? All that money, and he simply could not do the appropriate thing for himself, family, and fans. Just recently, South African striker Lyle Foster, who plays for EPL side Burnley, took a break to receive treatment over his mental health issues. That is a proper role model. You wonder why Rick could not do the same despite his evident struggles. Maybe, just maybe, if we as a society did not give power and fame to just anyone, then we would be in a better place with positive role models for future generations to emulate. Riky Rick's death highlights a much bigger issue. KwaMashu, the coastal city in Durban, where Riky Rick grew up, was a township created for black people by the white minority regime. We all know how gruesome the apartheid system of white minority rule was for the black people in South Africa. The oppression and heinous violence they faced, and all that. And unlucky for Riky Rick, he lost his father through suicide during his crucial formative years while he was in senior high school. Just imagine the struggle, despair, and trauma he had to go through, especially without a father figure in his life. Well, it was a lifelong challenge. Riky Rick once even admitted on the 2020 episode of his Lab Live podcast that his father's absence threw him into despair. When he passed away, I was so angry, so upset, I was so upset, like, why my life? But my problem here is that Rick's comments on the podcast and his deeds go on to suggest that he was essentially a coward. For a man who experienced firsthand how catastrophic it was for a child to be without his parents, why has he taken the same road to render his 2 children the same undesirable fate? Show me a more selfish man. Ricky Rick failed his only task on Earth, to be a father figure to his children, something he was deprived of in his childhood. It even gets more distasteful when I tell you that former Secretary General of Amnesty International, Kumi Naidoo, who happened to be Ricky Rick's stepfather, also had his mother commit suicide. Just imagine with the story of his come-up. Ricky Rick was supposed to be a game-changer in his family, but instead, he chose to add up to the infamous trendsetters. A real disappointment. Ricky Rick's death has attracted quite a number of touching tributes from around the world of music, but amongst all those popular figures to have mourned Rick, it is fellow South African rapper and colleague, aka whose message stood out. In his tribute to Rick on X, formerly Twitter, aka said that it was finally time for serious discussions to be had on the mental health concerns of South African men. According to aka, who sadly passed this year, current South African men are broken and damaged inside and that they carry generational trauma. You may want to know what aka was talking about. You see, South Africa has one of the leading suicide rates in the world. On average, around 200 people attempt suicide with 22 of them, resulting in eventual deaths daily in South Africa. Why? Because South Africa's current generation of men, especially black men, are experiencing knock-on effects from the era of white supremacy, which oppressed them until only 29 years ago. Considering that after independence, which was already late on, South Africa had to play catch-up with the rest of Africa and the world at large, they doubled up their efforts to build their country through migrant labor system and rapid urbanization. South African men had to devote themselves entirely to this cause, to the point of almost neglecting their fatherly responsibilities. As a result, the system raised boys without fathers and positive role models, and these boys are the men we have today, like Ricky Rick, aka, and even Lyle Foster. A current problem, but one deep-rooted in gruesome systems of the past generations. You know what? I still think Ricky Rick, and for that matter, anyone who takes their own lives, no matter the situation, is nothing but a coward. For celebrities, their cowardice is even in the multiples. It is like bestowing upon someone the title of a king, and after so long a period, they still do not know their responsibilities. What am I driving at? You know, suicide has always been one of society's challenges, one that society has actively, throughout generations, fought to discourage. Popular figures like Ricky Rick, on the other hand, are expected to be pioneers of the society's values, hence the reason for granting them fame and exposure. Now, imagine that the very ones tasked with educating the public against social cankers like suicide are the very ones committing suicide. How chaotic. What direction are we heading towards as a society then? For someone like Ricky Rick, whose father and step-grandmother also committed suicide, what message has he just passed on to his 2 children? It is definitely not looking good, as the fear that this develops into a family circus looms. Use this as a free space to talk to someone about your mental health today before it is too late. Do not be like Ricky Rick.